I will be presenting today with Crystal Turner. My name is Ronan Rock. I use they, them pronouns. This was developed by the NARST Ad Hoc Committee on Wellness and Accessibility, which came out of our meeting in Washington as identified a need by members. So let's start today with some land acknowledgements. Crystal, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Here in Canada, we do land acknowledgements a lot, and often we try to make them more personal because they can become formulaic. But I know a lot of people are not from Canada, so I will go with the one that's more informative. And yeah, where I am at the University of Calgary, it's in southern Alberta, and it acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy that is comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation within Alberta, including Nose Hill Métis District 5 and Elbow Métis District 6. And the Métis is, if something you're interested in Googling about later, is a very specific cultural identity to Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba.
Thank you so much, Crystal.
Yeah.
Um, and I will share, I'm zooming in today from Chicago. I recognize and acknowledge that the University of Illinois sits on the land of multiple Native nations. I acknowledge and honor the original peoples of the Chicagoland area, predominantly the Three Fires Confederacy, the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe nations, as well as other tribal nations that know this area as their ancestral homeland, including the Menominee, the Ho-Chunk, the Miami, the Peoria, the Sac, and the Fox nations. Um, Chicago is home to one of the largest urban indigenous populations in the country, so I also acknowledge that there is still a vibrant culture happening here today. And I appreciate the ancestral stewards of the land. Okay, I'm going to introduce myself. Hi, my name is Ronan Rock. To give you some perspective where I come from for this presentation, I am a graduate student with Maria Varelis. I am a PhD candidate about to defend my dissertation proposal, and I am also a science illustrator. So I worked for 10 years as a science illustrator with researchers in a variety of contexts. My specialty is invertebrate zoology. I also am neurodivergent. I am diagnosed with autism and ADHD. And related to that, I'm a font nerd. So I think a lot about design and I appreciate design and the aesthetics of our daily world. So things like posters and how we communicate information are really important to me personally.
Yeah, and hello everyone. I'm Crystal. I'm also a graduate student. I am a PhD candidate, and I work with Dr. Jennifer Adams. We do a lot of work on EDIA, and I specifically in student experience and academic advising. I am also, as some of us like to use the term, neurospicy, recently diagnosed as autistic and ADHD as well. And yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So just a quick question or, to kind of talk about, what is accessibility? Because we hear this word a lot, and what does it actually mean? So the definition that we're going to be using is, I think it's the next slide, correct? Yeah.
Might be in the secret
Oh,
notes.
oh, yes, it's in the notes. Sorry.
I
Yes.
can Crystal and I came up with a definition, but I would love if you can participate in chat with kind of what comes to mind when you think about accessibility. We, as an ad hoc committee, have actually spent a good amount of time talking about what it means to us and how we think about it. So Lauren puts out for everyone or a majority of people. While you guys are thinking about it for yourselves, scaffolding to allow access for everyone. Jennifer, I really appreciate that. Or
Yeah.
considerate of how others take in information is coming from Alexander.
Yeah. Access is very important. Yeah.
It's right there. So the functioning definition that Crystal and I identified for this presentation, just so we're starting at baseline, is thinking about ways in which people can show up as their whole selves in spaces, and inviting them opportunities to be as they would like to be. Um, but with that, we also note that no design is 100% accessible for everyone. As someone who I work with very closely will often point out is that every choice we make has affordances and limitations. So for some people, it might afford, as Hannah has shared, on-ramps to information. It might have those on-ramps, but for some people, an on-ramp might actually be not an on-ramp at all. That could be a barrier for others. So we acknowledge that with every choice we're making, we cannot make a choice that will be an absolutely perfectly accessible presentation. That doesn't exist. We also, oh, before I do that, I want to just point out with that, the committee is also thinking about accessibility from beyond just a lens of the traditional means, how we often see it presented, which is through a lens of disability, but we're also thinking about ethnicity, linguistic backgrounds, um, abledness, race, uh, cultural understandings. There's a lot of things that can lead to needs for access and on-ramps.
May I jump in quickly? Do you want
Yes.
to be recording this? And
Oh,
did
I
you
thought,
mean to us
Yes,
to say
we
that to the
did.
participants? Okay,
Thank
sorry.
you.
yes.
Uh, this is you're seeing live action of what happens when or people with ADHD have too many things to focus on.
Yes.
Yeah.
I show that we are recording right now, and we are
Oh
recording for
yes,
future
Mackenzie.
folks.
Yes,
It's set
Mackenzie
up
did this.
automatically. Thank
Yes,
you, Maria.
but thank you for asking. Yeah.
So my question for you, and some of you may have backgrounds in design. We often have lots of lives that we live. But this idea of what is design, how I'm defining it for the purposes of this presentation is design relates to our aesthetic choices that we make in presenting information in forms that might be ephemeral. So, for instance, the design of a theater presentation or the design of a space where you are giving a lecture or presentation, but they may also relate to more permanent artifacts like stone tablets going back quite some ways, or printed things, or even resources available online often have a certain permanence to them. So basics of design are color, font, image, and organization. We're going to get into these some more. I hope many of you are familiar with some of these words. I've tried to limit my jargon use as much as possible. Color, for those of us who do take it in, are different pigments or different light refractions that we see in the world around us. Font is the stylized representation of written language. Image, these can relate to a lot of different types of visual presentations. These are things that do not rely necessarily on text to convey meaning. They might be photographs, they might be videos, they might be graphs or maps. Trying to think of other images I might be missing. They might be sequential images like comics. And finally, organization is how we put those pieces together in situ. So the way that information is organized and the hierarchy that we use to make it more readable and digestible. So color for accessible design. There's a couple of points I would like to make. Color associations are culturally specific. We should consider contexts and implications. We use color for association as primates, so keep consistent colors and visuals. Color blindness does impact information. Red-green heat maps are a classic example. High contrast between text and background. One of the things for this presentation that I'm practicing, it's not something that I normally do very well. For accessibility, we'll be reading through the slide as it's written, and then I will go into more detail for each of these points. Things to note about color. Color can have very specific meanings. In some cultures, white is associated with purity. In other cultures, it may be associated with a funerary color. In the United States, we have an association with green as a color of richness or the color of money, because that happens to be what most of our dollar bills were printed as for a long time. But in other countries, green can be a color associated with danger due to issues within forests or the potential of predators in forests. Evolutionarily speaking, we use color as association to help us navigate the world around us. Classic examples of this that we see in biology are biomimicry. So animals that might look like a monarch butterfly, but are not in fact a monarch butterfly. They have made that color association or evolved with a color association because we've learned don't eat the thing that is orange, it's not good to eat. So we still have that system of visual interpretation and associating patterns through colors. So it can be really important that you're using color intentionally in presentation. We also have color blindness impacting information. This is one for me that I think about a lot because I grew up with someone in my household who was colorblind and would frequently be like, I like the color of that shirt you're wearing. It's a lovely purple. And I'd be like, this is not purple. What's happening right now? But because we use color to encode information, for instance, in graphs or maps, we need to be very careful thinking about the way those colors are perceived by people who have different rods and cones in their eyes. Finally, for vision in general, we want to think about high contrast between text and background. For this presentation, I've used black text on a white background, but you can have high contrast text and make something that is very, very hard to read. Many of our sports teams, if you're at a university that has a sports team or school colors, our school colors for the state of Illinois down in Urbana-Champaign are orange and blue, which are contrasting colors. They're extremely contrasting. If you were to do this same slide on a blue background with orange text, it would look almost electric in a very unpleasant way. So while it says high contrast between text and background, I'm just going to add that color is something to think about here. There's a scientific reason why those colors kind of vibrate against our eyeballs, and it's how our rods and cones fire when we see them. Fonts for accessible design. Sans serif fonts are preferred in general. That includes fonts like Arial, Tahoma, Verdana. Spacing between lines and spacing between letters are both important. And an 18-point minimum is the base for your fonts on presentations, on posters. 20 to 24 is more ideal. It's a little bit easier to read. I also just want to point out, as a font nerd, that there are some fonts that have actually been designed like Open Dyslexic to be easier for those with dyslexia to read. The way they're weighted is often more visually digestible for folks with dyslexia. But those same fonts might be harder to read if you have a vision impairment. Again, going back to that, some affordances and some limitations. Spacing between lines relates to the hierarchy of information. So when we put spaces between lines, it makes it more easy to read. When we put things close together, we assume that they're more associated. Spacing between letters is mostly just a readability thing. There are some fonts that tend to be very closely or narrow spaced. Those are harder to read in general. And 18-point minimum, boy, I did not realize how many of my presentations I went down past to like the 16 points. And I was like, it's fine. It's not fine. It's not very readable. Image considerations for accessibility. Provide verbal description of images. This includes photographs, videos, graphs, and maps. Connect visuals to context and content. Provide alt text on images. And do not present any video with flashing or strobe-like effects. So let's dig into this a little bit more. Providing verbal description of images is especially important when it's not just a placeholder image like I'm using here, when it is something that actually is a photograph from participants of your study, or when it is a video of a classroom. We want to make sure that we're describing those things out loud in addition to having them on the slide. Part of that is ideally you are connecting it to the context and the content and explaining how it relates to your overall talk. We'll get into this, how to actually do alt text on images. but that is a screen reader accessibility option, and we are heavily encouraging those who are interested to create digital versions of your presentation, artifacts that can be read by a screen reader for accessibility needs. This isn't just people who might be low vision, but also for those who have processing delays or need more time to just work through information. Finally, video with flashing or strobe-like effects can cause migraines for some. It can also lead to epileptic seizures. So it's not just you went to a club and you filmed a light that was strobing. Even if your image has high contrast switch between black and white backgrounds, that can lead to to issues for those who have this particular set of conditions. All right. Organizing for accessibility. Visual cues of hierarchy of information include headings, indentation, and separation of information. Reading order is cultural and linguistically based. Western languages design uses left to right hierarchy, while languages written right to left may have different design norms. Most languages use texts that are read top to bottom. So if we go into this a little bit more, visual cues for hierarchy of information. Many of us, if you've formatted a dissertation, if you've formatted papers for a particular publication, they have a lot of things they say, we want headings in this size font. It needs to be center justified. It needs to be bold. I believe the APA 7 has an entire section on how to properly do your headings for a paper. The reason that's important is because we use that larger heading size to guide ourselves through how to read that information. That is one of the on-ramps that we have. Indentation is also a really important aspect of hierarchy, and separation of information can often relate to that indentation. So we'll use indentation to say, hey, this is falling under this bigger subheading. And separation of information, if I have two things that are separated by a larger space, I would assume that they're a little bit further apart or they're not as closely related. Reading order is cultural and linguistic, and this is a point that I want to make, especially from the perspective of our committee, thinking about many of our members who are multilingual, who read in languages that are not written left to right. Um, in those, in people who have that skill, you might design the same poster on the same topic in two languages in very different ways. For those of us who are speaking English, our language is read left to right, so we often organize information in a left to right fashion. Most languages use texts that are read top to bottom. I did find out about several dialects from Southeast Asia that are written bottom to top, which I thought was really fascinating, and I haven't been able to do more research to figure out if they're read top to bottom but just written bottom to top. That part wasn't clear to me, but I found that really interesting. Another aspect that you're going to want to think about when we're presenting accessibly, and this is for both posters and presentations, we review words for the audience, terms, acronyms, names, proper nouns, speak slowly and clearly, using a moderate pace. Consider using captioning and test first, and I'll be talking more about this. Read parts directly, then expand. Describe all images verbally, and create PDF versions for screen readers. So I think many of us know to review words and terms. It's something that I sometimes still forget when I am going over stuff. For speaking slowly and clearly, one common recommendation made by AAAS, made by a variety of organizations like AERA, is to consider using closed captioning on your presentation. However, if you don't speak a Midwestern dialect of English, the data that was used to train that speech to text conversion may not properly understand you, and that can be a very frustrating thing. Several members of our committee said that it was actually kind of disheartening to see how the computer thought they were saying something, and they're like, this is absolute garbage. Like, that's gobbledygook. That's not what I said. So we do encourage you to consider using it, but test first and make sure that you feel okay using that technology and that it's representing your words accurately. Um, Read all parts directly and then expand. Take the time to go through the exact slide. I'm still working on this. It's a skill that I'm training myself on. Describing images verbally, again, really important, and creating PDF versions. Now, if you're like, I don't know how to create a PDF version, don't worry, we're coming to it. Posters versus presentations do have some difference. In presentations, it might be easier to have captioning either by an actual human who's typing as you speak or through a service like Zoom or PowerPoint that is auto captioning you using an algorithm. The other major difference that I want to point out is the timing of information. With a poster, all of your information is presented at one time. So that hierarchy and pattern for following the information is extremely important. Versus a presentation, we have successive pages that are building upon each other over time. So you aren't getting my entire presentation at once. We're going through it together. Some things to think about that are the same about them. Information hierarchy is still important across both, and color, font, and images are used in both. So today I'm actually going to focus on using PowerPoint, and I'm going to stop my share for a little bit so I can share my entire screen with you guys, because there's a couple of menu options that are harder to see if I don't do that. Let me share my screen again. Nope, just desktop. There we go. Share. All right, can you guys see the whole screen? Excellent. Welcome. Okay, so using accessibility features, we're focusing on PowerPoint today. I think a lot of people here might be using it. If you're not and you're using a different program, we can talk about offline about that. I'd be very interested in helping you. Let's get to it. So how do you create text for alt text for images? It's actually going to be a right click here, and I'm going to say view alt text on the menu. Can you see the menu? Is it showing up? Yay!
Yeah,
Crystal
yeah,
and I
we can see
tested this
it.
and I'm glad it's working. There are possibilities of generating alt text. Sometimes it works. I find that I like to just write the descriptions. So I would say screenshot of how to create alt text in Microsoft PowerPoint. And that's my alt text. So now when a screen reader is approaching this documentation for this image placeholder, it'll say, oh, cool. This is what this image represents. Let's go to the next slide. Selection pane tool. So this is also important when we're thinking about presenting or creating a screen reader accessible version. So to get to this, we go to tools. Nope, it's not that one. Selection pane tool. Beep, beep, beep. Where do you go? There we go. So it's in a range. Sorry. Now, here are the different items on my slide. Because slides are not like a Word document where it's pretty obvious the order in which something is read, you can actually change the order that something is read for your presentation. Low battery warning. So here it's going to say how to use accessibility features. Is this title? I would probably want to fix that. It'll read the exact title, not picture 7. So it would read the alt text for this. But this is the selection pane tool. If you're designing a poster, it's the same thing. There's just more objects on a single slide. Now, our final one that I want to go over, and this is one that I actually use all the time for my classrooms as well. There's a feature like this in Word if you're creating PowerPoint or Word documents for students, and that is in the tools, check accessibility option. Oh, wait, did I do it? No, I didn't do it. There we go. There's the accessibility check. Thanks, guys. So I have a couple of fixes that I need to make here. It's telling me, oh, I've got missing alt text on 10 images. So I want to make sure that I do that before we send this out as a PDF. Oh, I have 11 slides where I need to check the reading order. So I could go to the selection pane of this and I could say, oh, you're right. This title needs to go up ahead, and then text, and then placeholder. So that is how you do an accessibility check. This is kind of one of the final steps that I would do is as I'm getting something ready to be screen reader accessible. And the final step of this is going to be save as, and you can see my save as options. Sweet. Welcome to my box folder. It's kind of a mess right now. I'm going to hit export PDF options. And I want to make sure that best for electronic distribution and accessibility is checked. If you hit best for printing, it's going to get rid of all of your alt text information and all of your screen pane information because that's just extra data that the file doesn't need. So to make a smaller file, it would get rid of those things. I do not want to get rid of those things. So I would say save for this. I'm not going to do that yet because this is not accessible yet. So we're actually going to have some time for you guys to look at bad design. I have found examples that I'll be sharing in a box folder. So while we're getting ready for break, um, oh, thank you for whoever fixed it. Good job. Um, so I want you guys to think about, let me go back to sharing. I was worried that my share was the reason it wasn't doing it. There we go. Think about how does the text flow? What is the hierarchy? How readable is that text? What do visuals, if there are any, tell you about the story? And then in your small groups, discuss what changes you would make to a particular slide or poster. I've included both because I imagine that there are some of us in here who are doing one, the other, or even both during our time at NARST this year. So I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to go to my box folder. Beep, boop, beep. Crystal, can you work on creating our breakout rooms?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I am ready to go when you are.
Sweet. All right. I am sharing some of these I think will work. Here we go. Let me get rid of that one, get rid of that one, get rid of that one. So annoying. Okay. So I've got some examples. I'm sharing them in the chat with everyone. And I believe we'll still be able to see the chat in breakout rooms, but if we can't, I'll pop around and make sure that we can. Okay?
All right, and so you're going to see, as per usual, a little box come up, and yeah, feel free to chat. You know, we've got the examples, yeah, and we will see you guys soon. Like she said, or sorry, they said, I'm very, very bad for that for whatever reason, but uh, we will be popping in and out.
Mhm. Do, 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 do. Greetings and salutations, friends. Welcome back. Hi everybody. I hope that you got some joy out of looking at examples. I think there's some really there's so much about information that we can think about from a design perspective for me personally. Um, but wait, let me stop our share. Are there questions that you have after reviewing those examples that you want us to talk about, or things that you want to bring up from your discussion in your breakout rooms? I know I didn't make it to all of them.
And, you know, if you're not comfortable speaking out, and some people aren't, please put it in the chat. I'm happy to read it out for you.
Yeah.
I know one comment was about Canva and how accessible it is, how good it is, because people love to use Canva. And my understanding is not very, but I knew
Yeah.
you'd have a more detailed answer.
Canva, and Lauren, I'll get to you next. I see you also waiting patiently. Thank you. Canva does have some accessibility features. It doesn't have as many. I'm not familiar how good it is at creating a screen reader accessible PDF, but it does still have those selection panes where you can order your text. I will say that Prezi is not accessible at all. if you're looking from an accessibility standpoint, Prezi is not it. I know it makes really dynamic presentations, and some of us love how it works. Um, Not accessible, really difficult to create a screen reader friendly version of that. I'd have to do a little bit more research into Canva just to make sure that it is capable of creating that. My instinct is it might not be. And I say that as someone who has designed posters in Canva for friends. Sometimes that's what it is. Yeah,
Thank you.
Lauren.
Yeah, Ronan, we talked about, sorry.
No, go, go, go.
My pre-service teachers
Lots of
are
thoughts.
obsessed with Canva. And they spend tremendous amount of times designing these, things, um,
Intense.
intense. And a lot of this comes from like influencers that they see and things on TikTok.
Yes.
And this is why I am learning a lot more about it. But thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna look into it and see what can I stress to them. Um, but thank
And I know Teacher Talk loves Canva, and like it does have some very accessible design, um, or low a how would I say? There's not a huge barrier of entry to design and aesthetic work in Canva. Whereas there used to be quite a bit if you wanted to go to Adobe Illustrator or Adobe Photoshop. That has a steep learning curve for actually making something. Um, But I do think some of those, that ease of design means that we aren't necessarily incorporating back-end features that allow for accessibility like screen reader capable of PDFs. Hi, Liz. Thanks for coming today. All right, Lauren Browning, you also have your hand up. Talk to us. What's up?
I was gonna say, Liz's question, she just had to leave. I just
Oh,
realized. Oh. So mine was a question and a comment. We talked about in our group after you left, the is there an official size for NARS? So when we went for posters, that is, so we went to like I did the graduate student forum a couple of years ago, and they
hmm
were really great about giving like some specific guidelines and things like that. And so when I'm designing my poster for this year, I just made a separate copy file or file copy, and then I'm like redoing it based on that. But I don't
hmm
know if there's like a specific size or anything like that.
Let me
Or if
see.
NARS can make recommendations on that or like put it out there because I think people kind of show up with posters of different sizes, which is
We
sometimes
do.
infuriating.
Let me double check. Paper presentations, roundtable, poster presentations. The maximum size is 36 inches or zero point 0.9 meters tall and 48 inches or 1.2 meters wide.
Where did you find that information? I haven't
I
looked.
had to go to the information for presenters. So if you go to, and I'm so sorry, I know we didn't get to Liz's question. I apologize, Maria. Um, so I went to the NARST
Fantastic.
website.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I went to the NARST website, and down here there is conference details and instructions.
Okay.
When you scroll down in this document, we have poster presentations. The example template is here, and you can also use the online poster gallery. But yeah,
Wait,
that is very much a like instruction for authors thing that you have to kind of know where it might be in order to find it.
thank you.
Which is
That
also another challenge that people have, because I know I'm part of a handbook focus group on my campus, and we're talking about having a lot of hyperlinks or links that move you because, if you're looking through pages upon pages, it's just natural for humans to zone out.
It me. Maria, do you mind sharing in text or out loud Liz's question?
Sure. So we had an interesting conversation on many levels, and Lauren was there, and Jennifer. She asked towards the end.
Mhm.
So when there is an image that doesn't quite have meaning, but we just put it there really for decorative purposes, should we be asking ourselves why we put the image there? Should we avoid putting images that are for decorative purposes? Should all our images kind of be related to the meanings we want to communicate in terms of,
Yeah.
the issue of accessibility?
No, I think this is a great question, and it's one that I think another part of accessibility is aesthetics, um, and how we view the things around us. Um, and this is maybe as someone who really likes things like architecture and design and font. For me, there isn't innate meaning necessarily communicated in an image, but the fact that I am presenting you with it, I found some importance or some beauty in that, and that can be important as well. And I will say that as I was doing this presentation, I was like, should I just remove, like, here, let me show you, I can show you what this presentation looks like if I just remove this. And I remove, like, this is on the font background, but like, if I take all of the images out, oh wait, that's just deleted the slide. If I take the images out over here, like it creates a very different presentation. And actually, one piece of feedback that folks had for design is to not go too minimal on something just because maybe you're using an image. Like, I don't always have a photo of kids that I want to share for a presentation that I'm doing. Um, or a great, like sometimes the photos that you take during research, you're like, this shows what I needed it to show at the time. It's not a National Geographic image for the cover of a magazine. Like, it's a sketchy, like, cell phone photo that I took in a classroom to capture this important moment. Um, so I do think aesthetics can be part of our accessibility as creatures who exist in the world around us and seek beauty. They
But
may not always be necessary.
do you see a tension between aesthetics and
Yeah,
accessibility? And when
absolutely.
this tension occurs, where do
Mhm.
you err towards what? What should
I
we
will,
be? And that's probably
yeah,
a more ideological question
yeah.
about for
Um,
each one of us. But can you give us any advice of what,
yes,
from an accessibility perspective, really this tension
the tensions.
makes you think?
So my intentions are in presenting it. I might not spend 10 minutes describing all of the color splotches on this image, for instance. I might not describe like, okay, up here in the top right corner, because I don't know my right from my left, we start with green and yellow. But now on this middle part of the canvas, we're getting to kind of a blue splatter, moving into a magenta with more yellow splatters mixed in. That is not the level that it requires. And I will on images where I'm like, I'm putting these in because these are images that tie into a big idea somehow. Sometimes I will use them as an introduction to a slide. For other presentations, that's been the case. But I might say this isn't an image directly from this research, but it relates to my big ideas in X way. The other aspect of that from accessibility is just because this is an aesthetic choice that I've added it in, doesn't mean I'm not going to be putting in my alt text for those who would be using it or perusing a text and needing that explained to them. But I
Yeah.
might say in my alt text for a screen reader, here, let's go do this right now. View alt text, uh, close up of a painting, painting abstract that features colors. Author included this for aesthetic reasons to tie into earlier points in the presentation. So then,
Yeah.
if someone is using this for accessible points after the fact, they're like, why did they put this in here? That might be how I would approach this. And I will have to approach this for this presentation because I have to make sure we have an accessible format for it.
Yeah.
Um,
I might even put in that for myself, it can be really difficult to make eye contact, and I've always known this, but now I know why. And so I sometimes put pictures so people have something else to look at other than me, and or vice versa. You know, it's a comfort thing for me. So I might put that in the alt text that this painting is really like a placeholder and is just
I
for my
picked
comfort level.
I picked it because I liked these colors, and I think they're pretty.
Yeah.
And like that is acknowledging why you're making a choice as part of your discussion about the tension between aesthetics and accessibility. I think is an important one. And I know for those of you who don't know, this is Maria, who is my advisor, and we have frequent discussions about font because I refuse to turn in things to her in the Times New Roman Standard because it's a font that makes my eyeballs itch. So everything I turn in is in Avenir, and then she transforms it into Times New Roman to get me through my qualifying exams. So like there are choices where I'm just like I'm not going to compromise on this. It's important to me that there's a visual to go along with my ideas as a visual thinker. The fact that I am forced to use so many words all of the time maybe is a little upsetting for me personally. But yeah, any other questions as we're kind of having this discussion that are coming up for you all?
Yeah, and I mean, I won't speak for Ronan, but I would be happy if somebody sent questions, after, or comments for our committee. Like, we're having a lot of discussions because it's hard to move forward on some things when you don't have a frame of reference. So, love this.
Ooh, I haven't looked at the example poster template. Should we look at it all together?
It's bad, and I was actually going to ask if you guys in your committee might take on
So
like making
sorry.
a new one for next year.
Oh, boo.
I like that kind of goals. I don't love SMART
What a
goals, but
goal.
just smaller, achievable. I like that.
I was not involved in the making of this poster template, friends. I just need to say that. I do
I
think
guess
they've
we
done it.
can check that before we posted it.
Yeah.
I have no idea
Um,
even about this one, so yeah.
so
Mhm.
I will say something that came up in our discussion is doing references. And what I might say is rather than trying to list all of your references for a poster, highlighting maybe 4 or 5 references that you think are really key to the research, 2 or 3, and then providing a QR code and saying for full reference list, go here. Just as a way to really highlight those authors and put them at a large enough text, let's look and see how this is 68. This should be 72 is the minimum. Look at that. Okay, let's make our changes live action. I actually think the 40 might be okay. Let me look. Um, 42 points is minimum, so we need to up this. So we'll be talking to the rest of the committees. This is more text than I would traditionally suggest someone put on a poster. And just before I go into Ronan's TED Talk on poster design, I can pause this and we can wrap up and then come back to this and like look at changes that we would make because I think that might be more effective knowing that we all have lives and it's a Friday afternoon. So let
Yeah.
me pause my share and I will come back to this because I would like to look at it more in depth. I didn't realize they had one. I would have given it more thought.
Can
Okay.
I ask though, just really quick in relation to this, is
Yeah,
the abstract should probably not be on there as well because it's too much text. Okay.
I would not put an abstract on.
Okay.
In general, your abstract is all of those parts of the poster.
Mhm.
You could take your abstract, break it down into those sections, and use that as your header for each of those, or use that as the beginning point portion of those. But I would not include a full abstract. That's so much text.
Yeah.
It's just very gray. Um, let's go to final takeaways for this. Let me go to view slideshow. Slideshow, play. No, play from. Oh, God. Hold on. Escape. There we go. Slideshow. Play from current slide. Nope. Okay. But now my screen isn't shared. Accessibility. Okay, final takeaways. Elements of design for accessibility. Color, high contrast and consistent. Font, sans serif, large size. Image, alt text, provide descriptions. Organization, create hierarchy using size and arrangement. Design for screen readers, and consider creating accessible PDF versions to share with others. I think most of these, I hope, are making a little bit more sense. You do not have to do all of these at once. And some of you may be at universities that through whatever printing service you have available at the university, they may also do poster consultations. My partner works at Loyola University Chicago, and they actually have a team of undergraduates who are trained in designing posters, and they'll do consultations with any researchers who want. Um, and they're really great, and it helps support students. Consider creating accessible PDF versions. There is an option called temporaryurl.com. So if you're like, I don't want to make a URL that's available forever that someone can just keep saving, you can make a URL that's available to those who are attending that then will expire. So they can get access to the PDF, they can use that, but it doesn't go on for the rest of forever. If that's something where you're a little bit more concerned, if it's research that you're in the process of publishing and you maybe don't want to have on the internet for all time, nothing is foolproof. That is something to consider. But those are where we are. Shalom, yep, we'll be sharing slides down the line. I would absolutely love to make sure that you have those along with the rest of the recording.